Hello, everyone. Uh, Welcome to another episode of Chat with Chamindra. And I'm really privileged and honored to have Marty Casella. I hope I told your name correct, Marty.
You did.
Uh,
You did.
Super. So, Marty Casella, of first of all, I like to thank Dilshan Bonge for introducing me to Marty, and it has been we have having conversations back and forth, and I'm really happy, Marty, for thank you so much for accepting my invitation and joining today. And I know it's a bit late from your side as well in USA, but thank you so much for accepting my invitation and joining. So, if I give a small introduction to Marty. He's a actor turned playwright. He's a producer, and he has worked in many movies. And notably, I've just what I saw from you on you was about this horror movie of Poltergeist, right? Poltergeist is it?
Poltergeist, yes.
Yeah,
Steven,
Poltergeist, and
Steven Spielberg.
also yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing. One of the my favorite directors, film directors, and and I saw that I was very fascinated to know that you also acted in RoboCop 2 as well. That was one of my childhood, heroes when it comes to
Right.
movies. We were, very, deeply involved and passionate about those characters when we were young. So, Marty, so he's a very versatile person when it comes to the world of art, and I just want Marty for you to give an introduction about yourself so we can start off the conversation.
Well, I started off as an actor when I went to drama school in the United States, and I graduated from acting school. And I was so tired by that point of acting that I decided I needed to take a little break. And my dad worked in the movie industry. Many people in my family work in the film industry in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. So my dad was working on a film directed by Steven Spielberg. I was worked with my dad, and after the movie sort of finished principal photography, my dad went and spoke to somebody, and the next thing I know, I got to stick around and work for Mr. Spielberg on the reshoots for the film and doing some special effects work. And after that, Mr. Spielberg asked me to come on board. The woman who worked with him for a very long time, Kathleen Kennedy, she became his assistant, and I became his. I was his assistant, and she was his associate. And I worked with him on Raiders of the Lost Ark as his associate. And then I quit. 3 years had gone by, and I decided I wanted to go back to acting again, which I did for a little while. And he was kind enough to call me up and ask me to audition for the film Poltergeist, which Toby Hooper directed, but Mr. Spielberg wrote and produced. And so I acted. I acted in that film, and that sort of led to some other films, including RoboCop 2. I was in a kind of silly, what we would call like a compilation film, which is a comedy where there's all sorts of different stories going on at the same time. And it was called Amazon Women on the Moon. And it was basically, I played a character in a television series that was going on behind someone. And I did some other films. And while I was doing that, I started writing. And I had one of my plays produced with a bunch of people that I went to college with. And we started a theater company in Los Angeles. We produced one of my plays. It did the very first play did very, very well, and allowed us to start a company and produce several other plays of mine. And soon after that, I went to New York to work on a couple Broadway musicals, and I continued writing my own plays. And I actually, in conjunction with other people, I produced some of those in New York off Broadway and at theaters around the United States, regional theaters. And I haven't acted in some time. Every once in a while, though, someone will track me down and say, "Oh, would you be interested in doing this or doing that?" And about 10 years ago, when I lived in New York for about 25 years, and that's where Broadway is. That's where all the big, a lot of theater is. And a theater company that I admired very much, I saw many of their plays, and I introduced myself, and they kind of knew who I was. And there's a thing that the Dramatists Guild, that's my union as a playwright, says, well, if there's a theater, if you want to talk to a theater about doing your work, you should volunteer, be an usher, help out. So I went and saw all their plays and stuck around, and pretty soon they asked me to do a reading of one of their plays, which I did. I hadn't acted in a long time, and it went very well. And they asked me to be in the production off Broadway, and it turned out I was having one of my own plays done the exact same time in
Okay.
another city, and I had to be there. So now basically I have plays that have been sort of being done all over the world. Right now, one of my plays is in there's a production in the Czech Republic. There's another one that is going to go into rehearsal in Israel in a couple months. That same play is also scheduled to be done in Turkey, and a theater in Slovakia, which is the other half of, well, not anymore, but when it was Czechoslovakia, it's the Czech Republic and now Slovakia. And in a big 400-seat professional theater, this one play of mine has been playing there for almost 10 years now, and it plays in repertory. So my play gets produced at this big theater 4 times a month with big famous TV actors in Slovakia. So I went there 10 years ago for the opening, and it was a lot of fun. And I thought, well, it'll play, a little bit, few months or something. And it's 10 years later and it's still playing. So, and I finished a couple brand new plays. I got a commission last year to write a play for a theater in Houston, Texas. And I've got a film that I've written the script for, that's in the development phase right now, where they're raising money to actually shoot the movie in the springtime on the East Coast. So that's what I'm doing. That's kind of what I do. I've also taught school. I've taught writing. I've taught writing in colleges and in high schools, and kind of stuff like that. That's what I do. I haven't really produced and I actually directed a couple things in New York as well. So, and that was fun. So a friend of mine, I like this old expression, Renaissance man. That means you can do all sorts of things. So that's what I do.
Superb. That's like a true all rounder. Marty,
Yeah,
that's superb. So I
yeah.
just wanted to know, before I go further, I just wanted to know what inspires you to write. What's the inspiration coming from? Because I also do some writing. I do some.
Hmm.
I also write stuff. I write poetry, and those things. That inspiration comes mostly through life experiences when you
Yeah.
read books, and what usually is most of the time it's life experiences. You just want to get things out of your mind and put it on paper,
Yeah.
so that stressfulness and all those pain, and you take that load out of from your head and put it on paper, and then you're free. And when you
Yes.
come back and read it again, you feel good. Oh, something has come up. And I mean, when you read that, you feel some kind of art has been made without your knowing. So what inspires you to do things, Marty,
When I
when it
started
comes to
out,
writing? Yeah.
yeah, in terms of writing, when I started out, um, I basically wrote stories where I took maybe something that happened to me or an experience I had, and I changed it around, and I maybe set it somewhere else, but the story and the emotions and the events were very similar. I took those feelings, and as you described very accurately, you want to get them all out. And several of the plays I've had done um, were I I probably could refer to them as autobiographical. One of them specifically was very autobiographical. I wrote a play uh, that was the second play our theater company did, and it was a multi-character. There were 10 or 15. There were 15 or 16 characters in the play. There's a famous American film director from the 70s and 80s and 90s, and Robert Altman. And I was a huge fan of his films. And I love, most of the time plays now have 1, 2, or 3 people in them. And I had 15 people in this play, and it was based on my experience on working on Raiders of the Lost Ark and it was on a movie set, and it was all about this thing that was over budget and crazy and out of control, and the story of a kid who was working on the film and how that affected him. And that was very autobiographical. Sometimes people bring you stories, and oddly enough, I don't know what your experience is, or perhaps other writers you've spoken to, but if I don't feel something about the material, if I don't feel some connection to it,
Connection.
I say no.
Correct.
I kind of just go, no, I can't do that.
Yes.
And about the last, I would say the last 15 years or so, I've gotten very interested in finding real life stories about real people, and those mean something to me. And right now, the new play that I just finished, that I was commissioned to write, is about 2 United States generals at the very it takes place in 1945. America has basically sort of won the war in Europe, and now they're focusing on Asia. And it's a true story of how the 2 generals, who are old friends but were very, very different. The President Roosevelt and the Joint Chiefs of Staff brought them together, sent them to this little island, Guam, out in the middle of the Pacific, and said, "You've got to solve this war. That you guys run the Air Force. You'll have the other people. You two have to figure out a way to stop this war, because otherwise we're either going to A, have to invade Japan, or B, we're going to have to use this bomb we've been working on in the New Mexico desert, very near where I live now, and that was the bomb that was in Oppenheimer, the nuclear bomb." And Roosevelt said to them, "We don't want to use that bomb. We don't even know if it works, and we definitely don't want to have to spend another 5 years invading Japan, because then millions more will die." And these 2 guys had to sit down, and they had been best friends. They both had been generals in the Air Force, and one of them had some issues, and they had a falling out. And the play is about how one of them is asked to give up everything he believes in to find a way to solve this. And when I came across this story, I was so struck by it, because that's something that really interests me. 2 of my favorite plays one of them is a play by Arthur Miller called The Crucible, and it's about the Salem witch trials in America in the 1600s. And the other play that I love is a play by Robert Bolt called A Man for All Seasons, which was about Thomas More, who ended up being a Catholic saint, and he was executed by the British government because he would not approve of Henry VIII's divorce. And in both of those stories, a man is asked to basically save his life. In both stories, he has to deny everything he believes in. And that's what my play, the one that's set in 1945. And one of the guys is he's very well known in the United States, a general who was a complete hawk. He just wanted to go in and just literally bomb Japan until they gave up.
Yeah.
And the other guy wanted to do it in a different way. And in the end, he's finally asked or told that he has to go along with the mass bombings, and he just can't bring himself to do it. And he says no, and he walks away. And as the one general says to him, "If you walk out of here, you will be an asterisk in history. No one will know you. You'll be a footnote in the history books, and you'll be anonymous. You'll be working on an Air Force base somewhere, and no one will know you. care who you are. And the other general says, I don't care.
Yeah.
I would rather do that than spend the whole rest of my life and perhaps my afterlife having to atone for what I did. And so a lot of the stories that I've written, plays that I've written, and some film scripts in the last 10, 12 years have been based on stories like that, of true things. But they have to affect me. They have to,
Have an impact on you, right?
it has to
Impact
have an
on you.
impact on me so I can feel strongly enough about it. And in this new play, it's called Titans, like Titans of industry, Titans of warfare, and as one of the characters finds out near the end of the play, the Titans have another definition, which they were the forebearer of the Olympian gods. They were the gods that gave the Olympic gods their gifts, their magic, the things. And once they did that, they weren't needed anymore. And one of the guy who gives everything up, he stands by his guns and he walks away. He says, we're going to end up like the Titans. We've served our purpose. We've introduced the world to either an atomic bomb or endless hand-to-hand combat warfare by bombing people until they give up. And once that part of war takes over, we don't even need to exist anymore. And there was a play done, in a reading of the play was done in May. And I wasn't sure whether, I mean, one of the guys in the audience said at the talk back after the play, well, I didn't really want to come here tonight. My wife made me come because the article said that it was a play that was 90 minutes long about two guys arguing how to stop World
Okay.
War II. And he
Okay.
said, I couldn't think of anything more boring. And he said to me, I laughed when he said that. And he
Yeah.
looked at me and he said, my wife and I were on the edge of our chairs. We were, this is going on right now in our world every day. And two or three people in the lobby afterwards brought up what's happening now in Gaza, in Israel, about how do we wage warfare now? How do we lose our soul as soldiers and as a country when we commit these acts of mass destruction? And although the play is set almost 80 years ago, actually, yeah, 81 years ago, the audience afterwards was like, oh my gosh, this is happening today. And that made me really, I don't want to say happy because the plays very dramatic, but I was relieved. I was really satisfied because they got it. And even 6 years ago, wait a minute, 8 years ago, I got a commission to write a play for a theater in New Jersey, on the East Coast of the United States, and it was another real life true event about a bombing that happened there done by Germans before the United States had entered World War One, and it's about European immigrant and his wife who've come to America to have a good life, and he turns out to be a suspect in this bombing, and it's all based on a real life story. And I wrote it in a time in our history when we had a brand new president, 8 years ago, who was locking people up and putting them in camps and deporting them. And it was very, very similar to what happened in 1916 before the U.S. entered the war. And so that's what interests me. That's what makes me excited to write, because when you want to write something, it's a big commitment. You probably know that. The writing itself can take a year. To write the play about
100%.
the two generals, it
Yeah.
took a year of research. I read probably 15 books. I read a buddy of mine was in the American Air Force, and he got me
Yeah.
access to the an Air Force library, and there were all these PhD thesis papers written recently about these two generals and who they were, and I got all this great information that nobody knew, to even put in the biographies of these guys.
Yeah.
So And I realized when I sat in the theater that one night to watch the reading in front of an audience, some things happen in the play, and I started going, wait, that's me. That's actually, that character is me.
Yeah.
Like I had to put myself in that position of what would I do if somebody said, oh, we're going to start bombing Tokyo. And the very first night, well, you find out in the story later on, the very first night of bombing, in the early summer of 1945, they killed 250,000 people in one night. And I sat there in the theater, and people came up to me, said, wow, I kept thinking, what would I do? And that's why I write. I want someone to sit in their seat and either say, what would I do? Or something that I've experienced a lot younger, is people would come up to me in the theater and go, after the play, and go, that's my story. How did you know that? And I
Yeah.
said, well, it's a universal story. And my favorite writing teacher taught me a long time ago, and it's something writers are usually taught. The more specific something is in its details and in its telling, somehow it makes it so that anybody can relate to it.
Really.
All those deal. I mean, my teacher always used the example of the famous musical Fiddler on the Roof, which takes place like in 1906 in Russia, and about Jews having to leave because they're being chased out of their homes. And when it opened in New York, it was very popular. And then Japanese producers came from Japan in 1965 and wanted to do it in Japan. And the writers were like, this is about Jews in the shtetl in, the steppes of Russia. What are you talking about? The Japanese audiences won't understand. And they said, oh, they will, because that entire musical is about tradition and how you have to follow your parents' orders about who you marry. And the writers agreed, and when it went to and opened in Tokyo, I think it was late 1965, the audiences were weeping and they were cheering and standing up at the end of the play. And the authors were in the lobby saying, did you understand it? And they said, that was my family. My family forced me to marry my husband or wife. And when something is that specific, somehow a key turns and everybody can understand it. So I always follow that. That's why I make sure all the details are correct. I make sure that emotionally it's correct, so that we can, and that's where you probably know the phrase about write what you know. That's what people always tell young writers. Well, write what you know. Well, that means many things, but to me, it means write what you know in here in your heart. And if you can express that, you're going to move huge theaters full of people.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you're talking to people, you're
Yeah.
talking to their senses actually, and
Yes.
you're connecting with them.
Yeah. And you are. And like I said, the play of mine that I know was done in Colombo,
The Irish Curse, right?
The Irish Curse, that Dilshan
Yeah. Yeah.
reviewed, and that's how he and I got to know each other, because
Yeah.
his review. He sent it to me. He found a way to get it to me, and I read it, and it was so intelligent, and he so understood what the play was about, and he and I spoke back and forth. I think I've read 3 of his novels. He even asked me to write the introduction to one of them. One of them that I really love, the one about the 2 guys who get together in the coffee house, the cafe, as the world sort of burns outside. But he said to me when we spoke, he said, that play's set in New York City. It's about 4 Irish American guys and their lives. And he said, our audiences laughed at the same jokes. He said, 10,000 miles around the world, an audience in Colombo, Sri Lanka, was laughing at the same jokes. And that to me is magic. There's 2 jokes there's two jokes in the Irish Curse that when it was done in Slovakia, it was done in Slovak, but I sort of knew from place names and people's names where they always were in the script, and I knew what was going on. And there's a specific joke that that I thought, well, this audience isn't going to get that joke. They just won't get it. And when that line hit, the audience roared, and then several people clapped. And the director was sitting next to me. He's from Slovakia, but he had gone to school, I think, at Columbia or NYU in New York. So he spoke English perfectly. And I turned to him and I said, "Wait, you guys have that stereotype here? You know that joke?" And he looked at me and he said, "Marty, everybody in the world has that stereotype of that joke. Of course we're going to laugh at it." So there's, I'm kind of a sentimental guy, or as a friend of mine said once, she complimented me. She said, "Oh, you're not sentimental. You're full of sentiment," which is good. Sentimental somehow has gotten a bad rap, but but if you're full of sentiment, then people are going to get it. We can, 80 years later, we can watch the classic Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life, with Jimmy Stewart, and people 80 years later can sit and watch that movie and relate to it and cry because everybody understands. No matter where you live in the world, somebody can relate to a story of a guy who stayed in the small town where he grew up to help his family and help the people, and suddenly he woke up one morning and he's 45 years old and he's given up his whole life to help everyone in his city and his family. And I mean, people can relate to that wherever you are in the world.
It's a universal language, isn't it?
Yes, it is a universal language. And if you can find that, I mean, I when I got the phone call 6 months ago from a pretty well-known Israeli theater director, he's also an actor, and he called me and he said, "Oh, I have a friend in the United States and she sent me your play, The Irish Curse." And he said, "I just love it." He said, "I think our audiences are going to love it here. And the initial production is probably going to be done by the National Theater of Israel." And I'm just like, I'm shaking my head going, will they get the jokes? And the guy said, "They'll get the jokes. Don't worry." He said, "I'm a pretty just regular old, guy from Israel." He said, "I got the jokes." And he said, "Our audiences will get them. They're pretty smart." So, I mean, there's something really magical about having written something. And The Irish Curse, when it was done in an off-Broadway theater in New York, one night I walked out after the performance and there was a guy in the lobby and he was sitting on a bench and he was crying. And he had a bunch of friends around him. And the closer I looked, I realized I knew the guy. I'd gone to a couple dinner parties where he was, and the friends I suddenly realized I knew as well. And I walked over and I said, I pulled one of the guys aside. I said, "Is he okay?" And the guy looked at me and said, "Well, you should ask him that question." And I walked over to him and I said, Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help?" And he looked at me and, had tears running down his face. And he just said, "That's my story. That's my story." And I said, "Oh," I said, "I'm sorry. It's not offensive or anything." And he goes, "No." He said, I'm crying because the play is about a guy who, one critic summed it up, and we used that sentence to sell the play. It's about a guy who finds his tribe. It's about a guy who finds people just like him, that understand him. And I mean, that's what we all do. No matter where you live in the world, you're looking for people who understand you, that have the same emotional experiences you have the same thoughts and feelings. And I mean, I just I always I mean, the play got turned down by 40 different theaters around the United States. No one would touch it. No one wanted to do it. And I finally called a buddy of mine who directed a couple of my other plays, and I gave him the play, and he called me a couple weeks later and he said, "Well, let's have a reading and see how it works with, in front of a little audience." And we had a little reading, and the audience loved it, and the actors didn't want to leave. And actors in New York are notorious when they do readings. They do the reading and then they shake your hand and you pay them, $25, and then they leave.
Yeah.
The five actors wouldn't leave. They wanted to talk about the play, and the director kind of pulled me aside and he said, "If the actors want to talk about the play, I'm guessing the audience will want to talk about it as well." So I didn't expect it to get the response it's gotten. I mean, it played in Brazil and Scotland and in London and in Edinburgh, London. I'm trying to think of the other places. It played in Prague. It played all over Canada, and it was in New Zealand a couple years ago, and it just makes me happy. I mean, that play is also political. Most of the plays I write are political in some way or another, but yeah, yeah, you have to feel it inside yourself. One of my writing teachers said to me, he said, if you get carried away while you're writing it, or whether when you're reading it back to yourself, if it makes you laugh, probably it's going to make somebody else laugh. Or if you get teary reading a certain monologue or a scene between two people and you get teary and choked up, he said, the audience probably will too. If you have the craft and the skill, I guess, like the artistic skill to be able to pull that off. I'm I discovered when I was younger, I had this. I don't want to call it a gift, but it is a gift. Like I worked with a person who was a songwriter for Broadway musicals, and I used to say, she'd bring a lyric in, and I'd say, "That's great, wow, great job," and she'd say, "Oh, she would never claim it. She'd say, "Well, it just appeared last night," or, "I found it on the desk this morning." And I understood what she meant. And that's how, I mean, I feel so lucky to be able to be still doing this. Like my first play was 42 years ago. And I'm still doing it. And I'm always been a storyteller. I have when I was a kid. I used to go to the movies when I was a kid, and I'd come home. My mom would pick me up. She'd drop me off at the movies and she'd pick me up. And she'd say, "Well, how was the movie?" And I'd say, "It was really, really good." And she'd say, "What happened?" And on the way home, I would tell her the whole story. And after a while, she'd say, "You're good telling those stories." She said once, she goes, "I don't even have to go see the movie." So and I love that. And
Yeah.
the experience I had working with Mr. Spielberg, I also got to work with two amazingly talented guys, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, the guys who did Back to the Future and so many other films. And working with them, I learned just being around on the set of I worked on their film Used Cars with them, which is a wonderful film. And there's somebody asked me the other day in an interview about why people like stories. And I said, I think it goes all the way back to prehistoric times with, cavemen. And, what did they find in the caves where the cavemen lived? They saw drawings of the hunt and deer and rabbits, hunting rabbits. And we want to tell those stories. We want to tell like either heroic stories. People need heroes. People need, I think that's why for the last 20 years we've had all these superhero movies, because the world's hard place sometimes, and people like seeing Thor and Iron Man and Captain America and Black Widow. I got to remember the women too, Miss
Yeah.
but and I discovered that when I was a kid. I wrote poems when I was like in junior high, middle school, and I started writing real full length plays when I was in high school. And I love telling stories. I always have, and
I
they have to
think,
mean something.
yeah. So what you talk about hero song, even the song by Mariah Carey, the song "Hero." She
Hero,
tries to invoke that
yeah,
part of heroism from you, from those from
yes,
that song, right?
yeah,
From her lyrics, the way she sings it, it's just bringing something on others which they
yeah,
don't see, but when
yeah,
others tell you, they kind of think about it, and that next version or the best version or the other version of themselves comes out, right?
yeah.
It's like you don't know, but when you hear from others, you start to realize the same, isn't it?
You do, and when other people
Yeah.
tell you something, you start to say, "Oh, I guess, I guess that meant something to that person." Or, I when you asked that question at the very beginning, I had a friend came to me and said, "Oh, I got this idea that I kind of sold a theater to be a musical, and he's Italian American, and I'm Scottish Italian, and and I heard what the story was, and I was like, oh, that sounds like my Italian grandmother." And we we told all these stories, and when all that happened, my grandmother that I had grown up like down the street from, and she used to, babysat me, and I took her to church and did stuff, and by that time when that play was being put together, she had Alzheimer's, and she couldn't come see the play. But when my family all came to see the play, at intermission, they all came to me in the lobby and said, "Oh, that's Nona. You're writing about Nona." Yeah. And I said, "Yeah." But I said, the guy that is the director, and this is his idea, and he had an Italian grandmother too. And so many of the people just kind of came out of nowhere, and they weren't Italian, but they're like, "Oh, my Jewish grandmother did that. She'd make food for us on holidays," or whoever. Like, that's what grandmothers do, or aunts, your favorite aunt. And my sisters, that play was 30 years ago, and my sisters still come to me and say, "Can't you talk to somebody into doing that play? We got to bring that memory of our grandmother. It was so wonderful to know that while we were watching this play about her, she was in like a home, an old folks home." And that's another reason why it's great to write things. And you know and when you can
So,
tap into that vein that other people share
yeah,
unknowingly,
yeah.
like I with Dilshan, I'm trying. I'm sorry. I hope when he listens to this, he'll forgive me for getting the name of the one novel. But and I have it on my shelf. Believe it or not, I just moved into a new place, and
Okay.
I have three of his books up here. I have a shelf written by novels, nonfiction, where I actually know the people who wrote the books, and I've got three of Dilshan's books up there. But that 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 story he wrote really spoke to me. And there was another one that he wrote about a boy who took an overnight bus on a really long bus trip, and he ended up sitting next to this young woman, and they started sharing stories back and forth, and they sort of started falling in love. And he said, "Well, do you think people in other countries would relate to this?" I'm like, "Yeah, we've all sat on a bus or an airplane, or
Yeah.
and you start talking to a perfect stranger, and then all of a sudden your whole life changes." And I haven't read any of the things he's written lately, but I love that story. I love the story about the two guys. We talked about it earlier. The two guys sitting in their favorite coffee house, or what's left of it. And I think in the novel, outside there's a war raging between, is it the Soviets or the Russians, and some other country nearby kind of wanted Sri Lanka, and Russia was sort of fighting with them over that. So, and he just sort of went with that as if, oh, this is the end of the world. And it turns out in his novel, it does sort of turn out that it's for them, it is the end of the world. But it's such a beautiful story about all their memories and all the great times they had, you know, as they were growing up, and everyone can relate to that, I think.
Great.
What do you like to
Ma-
write about? I know you have another question, but what do you like to write?
so what I used to do was actually I've written about my life experience as well with my mainly related to my father who passed away to a brain cancer, and
Mm,
I had a very very deep attachment to him as a
yeah,
kid, and when he suddenly fell ill, and that was very I mean unforeseen.
yeah,
We didn't expect him to get sick, and then I had a situation where he was almost in his deathbed, and I my first son was also born, and I was fighting to strike a balance of having a newborn and someone who's going to lose his life, and someone just started like
yeah,
balancing, and I had to play both roles as father and son. So those kind of experiences was very difficult, and it was mentally draining because I had
yeah,
to balance both sides, right? So then I just wrote about that, and how you can be stronger, and situations comes to change you as a person. You
yeah,
move on from your childhood, and when responsibilities come childhood, you move on, you become a better version of yourself,
yeah,
and you try to learn from them, and you try to grow from them. So that experience taught me a lot from that time period in 2016, 2018. That time period was a huge what's a what you call turn of page of my life,
yeah,
totally
yeah,
turn of page. So those kind of things, I write those things down, though I haven't published or anything. I just write it down,
yeah.
and
Well, that's all
just
right.
keep it down and write
Yeah,
it. But when I read it back, I get to learn, oh, I have been there and have come this way, this long way now, and have improved and grown as a person. I think because I wrote it down, I know that where I was at that time.
yeah,
Because we have very short memory, no, as humans, we lose things very easily. When new things come, we forget the past. I
yeah.
mean, that's an obvious thing with many humans.
Do you ever think you'll get to a point where you might read that to your son? Is that
Yeah, yeah, it
yeah?
might happen. Yeah, but now he's writing. He's doing some writing, and he's writing about. He has this fantasy about vampires
Yeah,
and a lot of things, and he's writing stories, and he's asking me. I am doing the proofreading for him, and he has push me to a level. Please publish it, please publish it. I want
yeah,
to get it published. I share it with my friends because he's just he's just 8 years old. He can't go
yeah,
and do it to him by himself, no, but he's writing. He has this, his imagination is very deep. He has very good imagination, and he writes things, although there are spelling mistakes and all, which I'm
yeah.
there to help him. But
Good.
he does this free writing, and he has written one book. He's finished one, and I've helped to edit him, and he's doing a second book as well. So he's I think that comes from generation to generation. If you do it, your son and your daughters, they also get that, you know
They get it.
they get
They
it, that
do.
they want to do
You know,
that.
that you made me think of something when you were talking about that experience looking after your father and then also being aware of your son
Yeah,
and looking after him. And when Barack, Barack Obama was president and his wife Michelle, and a lot had happened, and Michelle Obama was interviewed, and she was asked, well, do you think those hard, tough experiences made your husband the man he is now? And her answer was very interesting. She said, no. She said, I think those experiences revealed the man that he actually was. Not that he became that, but that he always had that inside of him to be able to rise to the occasion, and it gave him an opportunity. And it sounds like that may have been for you similar to that.
yeah,
That
yeah.
you,
When you're pushed to the limit, you change your version. I mean,
yeah,
that what we talked about, heroes and superheroes, that superhero comes out
yeah,
from you.
yeah.
That
I
happens.
there was a play of mine that was being done in Los Angeles, and it had worked everywhere else. And this director was really good, but we were only 4 days away from having an audience, and the play's a funny comedy, and he directed it like it was the most serious thing you'd ever seen in your life, and the blocking was sloppy, and the theater producer and all of us sat there just like hands up in the air, and the producer just said, I don't think we can open this. This is, what did you do? You ruined this play. And I said, look, let me go home and write down some notes, and we'll come back tomorrow night, and don't cancel it. Don't cancel it. And the director was like, well, I don't know what I did. And I said, let me write some notes down and just let the actors go home and cancel the preview tomorrow night. And when I got home, I was staying with my family, and my mom said, oh, you're just in a terrible mood. And I said, yeah, I said, I don't even want to go back tomorrow. How did we hire that guy? He just didn't get it. It's like a serious, people crying thing, and they're supposed to be, and I said, I don't even want to go back tomorrow. And I went to bed. And when I woke up the next morning, my mom was sitting in the kitchen, and she looked at me and she said, those plays are your children. Those plays are your babies. And she said, you can't desert them now. She said, if that was a child of yours, you'd go to school and fight and talk to the teacher. So she said, no, the play works. Go back there, write your notes out, and man up, basically, using that expression, and I looked at her and I was like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, okay. And I went that night, and it was hard. I had to stand up to this director, and I kept saying,
Yeah.
they're wonderful actors. We know the script works. What's going on? And he worked with the actors. They walked through the entire script. He cleaned up all the actions. He, like, when an actor in a play, we have a thing called the setup and the delivery. And if it's a funny line, you set the line up, and then the person says the punchline. And he was having them walk on setups, so the audience's attention was watching an actor crossing the stage instead of what he was saying. And then one guy gave one of the biggest laughs in the show. He had him say the line with his back to the audience. And I just said, no, you have to clean that up. And the moment he started working with the actors and doing that, I saw a change come over all of them. And he worked through the whole play in about an hour and a half. And then the producer came in and said, okay, I want to see the whole thing again. And in 24, we took a break. We came back 20 minutes later, and they started the show again. And we were all laughing. The designers, the set designer, the costumer, I was laughing. The producer, who'd been so angry, was laughing. And all they had done was, there was just this adjustment. It was, no, you can't. You can play it realistically, but you can't play it like it's a serious drama. You have to, the tone. It's all about the tone. Because he said, well, I wanted the guys to be real. I said, oh, they're wonderful actors. They'll be real. But it's your work that has to be adjusted, and so you never know.